In this lecture, we're going to talk about GRC, Governance, Risk Management, and Compliance. We have talked about each of them by themselves, but they are so interconnected, I think it's important that we talk about them as a group as well. And GRC is that comprehensive approach where we analyze and manage our risks while aligning with our business objectives and our compliance standards. So let's first start out by looking at the three components, and we start out with governance. And governance in the context of information security is to make sure that we have that strategic alignment where IT aligns with the business objectives. And then we make sure that our leadership, our structures, our processes, and our communication allows that alignment to happen. So for us, what that means is we translate the business goals into security goals, and we make sure that our security investments support the business needs. We make sure that we have proper resource management, meaning we have enough resources, and that is human, financial, technological, or whatever else we need. We have enough for our information security programs. Then we will have some sort of performance monitoring. We need to make sure that we know how well is our information security program performing against its objectives. Here, we can use the KPIs or the KRIs that we talked about already. We also, in our governance, need to make sure that we have value delivery. We deliver value to the business through optimized information security investments. And this also involves finding the right balance between the security requirements and the business needs. And then finally, we also need to make sure that we have that integration between our policies, our compliance, and our ethics. We need to make sure that all of our activities are in alignment with our policies, our ethical guidelines, and that we comply with the legal and regulatory requirements that we have for our organization. So that was the high-level view of governance. Next up, we have risk management. So as you already know, risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, and responding to risks. We manage the risk. So real briefly, risk identification is us identifying the risk for the organization. And remember, to have a risk, we have to have the vulnerability and we have to have a threat. Then we do the risk assessment. Here we analyze the likelihood and potential impact of the identified risks. And we normally do that first with qualitative risk assessments. Those are the ones where we go in and assess the likelihood of something happening and the impact if it does. And then based on that assessment, we do the quantitative risk analysis on the ones that are deemed high enough risks. In the quantitative risk analysis, we put numbers to the feelings. Qualitative risk analysis was the one that was a feeling. I think this is a low probability and it's probably high impact. It's guessing, it's vague, it's saying this is probably a good quality shirt. Qualitative. Then quantitative, we put numbers to those feelings. This is the likely cost of this happening. But we only do the quantitative risk analysis on the ones that have the highest impact. Then we pick a risk response that can be acceptance, avoidance, mitigation, or transference. Risk rejection, just ignoring the risk, is never okay. If we accept the risk, then we know the risk is there. We have done our analysis, our due diligence, but accepting the risk makes more financial sense than it does to mitigate. We can also choose risk avoidance. We can stop doing whatever is putting us at risk. We had the example with the laptops. If we lose too much valuable data and there's no other way to protect us when laptops get stolen, well then we can stop using laptops. Then the most common risk response is mitigation. We put something in place that mitigates part of the risk. We reduce the risk level to an acceptable level, and then at that point we accept whatever is left over. That is the residual risk. And then finally we have transference. That was the one where we get insurance, or we go into a partnership with someone else. If we're 50-50 partners, they also own 50% of the risk. If we have a data center that might flood, we buy insurance, and then at least part of the data center we have transferred the risk for. And then as the final stage, we have risk and control, monitoring and reporting. Even though we have implemented all these new controls, we also need to make sure that they function as they should, and there are no new risks that emerges that we now need to mitigate. And here again, it's a continuous cycle. We identify, we assess, we respond, and then we monitor and review. Then we have the third part of the GRC, compliance. And compliance means that we're conforming with some sort of stated requirements. That could be laws, regulations, or our internal policies. First off, we have the big one. Those are laws and regulations. If we are in an industry where we need to comply with certain laws, that could be the GDPR, HIPAA, or SOX, or PCI DSS, then of course part of your job is to make sure that we are in compliance. But it could also be internal policies. We need to make sure that what we do is in line with our internal security policies, our standards, our procedures. As part of compliance, we would also have auditing and monitoring. And that's where that we on a regular schedule confirm that our organization is compliant over time. Again here, we check against laws, regulations, internal policies, and with the audits, we can both have internal or external audits. Internal are mostly done by ourselves, mostly making sure that what we have in place is enough for what we're doing, that we are in compliance both with our internal policies and also the laws and regulations. An external audit would be done by an outside company, and they will come in and confirm pretty much the same thing, but since this is an official body, it is someone that is hired to come do it for us, and this is something they do every day. They're first off going to be much better at it. They're also, when they're done, going to give us a piece of paper saying we are in compliance, assuming that we are. And then to help both types of audits, we of course have to have continuous monitoring. Part of our compliance could also be incident response compliance, making sure that when we do incident response, it complies both with the legal, regulatory requirements and our internal policies. With our compliance, we would also find ethics and privacy. We need to, within our organization, promote ethical behavior when anyone handles information, and that ethical behavior needs to be part of our organization's compliance program. The same with privacy. Even if you can't access the data, you need to have and need to know before you're allowed to. As the final part of this lecture, let's talk about how interconnected GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance is, and why they should be. So we start out by looking at governance and risk management. Governance is the overall strategy, the direction for the organization. That includes the risk appetite. That is the level of risk that our organization is willing to accept. Well, then that risk appetite guides the entire risk management process. So if the governance of our organization determine we have a low risk appetite, well then in our risk management, we would probably implement much stronger controls to mitigate all the risks. Now, if we look at governance and compliance, again here, the governance structure of our organization is the one that establishes our ethical, legal, and procedural guidelines for all the activities we do within our organization, including compliance. But we use the compliance requirements in the creation of the policies and the procedures under the governance program. And then finally, we have risk management and compliance. Again here, we use risk management to identify the threats and the vulnerabilities. But since this is for compliance, we focus on what can cause us to be non-compliant with the laws, the regulations, or the standards. And we can use that compliance to feed into our risk assessments. And then after we have done the risk assessments, we can highlight the areas where we're non-compliant. So really how interconnected GRC is gives us that more holistic approach to information security because each element reinforces the others, and then they combined give us a more resilient and effective information security program. Now, if we didn't have that strong governance, well then the information security program would not be effective because we don't have the right direction, we don't have something effective that we can align the security strategy with. If we don't have proper risk management, well then obviously we would be open to risks, but we might also not prioritize the right initiatives, we might not do the effective analysis of what is actually a risk, and thereby mitigating things that are not a problem and leaving the ones that actually are problems wide open. And if we are non-compliant, well then we can have legal penalties, it can cause reputational damage, and it can cause financial losses. Not being compliant, both with our internal policies or external regulations, means that we don't meet the legal and ethical responsibilities that we have, and we open ourselves up to potential damages. Governance gives us the direction, risk management guides us on how we use the resources, and compliance helps us ensure that we are both ethical and within the legal boundaries. And with that, we are done with GRC. I hope this has given you a little bit of a better understanding of how governance, risk management, and compliance are completely intertwined and why we need all three to have effective security management. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next lecture.